Great. Thank you, Brad. And again, thank you all for taking time out of your day here to attend the webinar. We have a lot to cover in about 30 minutes, so I'm going to move through this kind of quickly. And real quick before we get started, a little bit about me. My name's Joe Foster. I'm an EAM specialist with AssetWorks. I've been with the company a little over 9 years now. And my background's actually in urban planning, GIS, transportation planning. So worked with a lot of different groups on kind of large planning projects geared toward different types of infrastructure. Okay. And then immediately before joining AssetWorks, I actually worked for a small software company. We did custom development work for asset management and grant management, specifically related to transit agencies at the state and local level. So I know we have a couple transit folks on the call today too. So just know that I'm very aware of what you guys do and some of the detailed reporting requirements that you have. And then since joining AssetWorks, I've actually worked on a number of different positions. Joined the company as a project manager, moved over to the implementation side of things, led our implementation team for a little bit, and then more recently moved over to sales and marketing. So just a little bit about my background. Quick agenda for today. I want to cover a couple things. First and foremost, I'm going to give you an overview of AssetWorks EAM. Okay, what does that mean? What are some of the capabilities as they relate to fleet? And other departments and other groups. Okay, so we'll start there. We'll also talk specifically about some considerations for fleet specifically. I know that's kind of the goal of this webinar is a lot of you guys may be using the system currently to manage your fleet assets and looking at expanding potentially to other departments or other asset types. So we'll talk about some of the considerations there if you guys are thinking about doing that. I also wanted to highlight a few specific tools in EAM. But specifically a few that I think you guys as a fleet group could potentially take advantage of as well. Okay, and we'll wrap up with some industry specific examples related to facilities and parks and rec. And as Brad mentioned too, if you guys have questions, feel free to put those in the chat and we can either answer them throughout or kind of at the end with the Q&A. Okay. So again, just to kind of frame the discussion, I know a lot of you guys today are using the system to manage your fleet operations, okay? And the software itself is really designed to manage all aspects of those operations, all right? So if on the fleet side, everything from kind of the front office, drivers reporting issues on the vehicles, to the shop floor, technicians and supervisors actually working on your vehicle assets and equipment, okay? Parts room functionality. We have full inventory management capability in the system, all the way to kind of management back office functionality. I want to see life cycle analysis, trend analysis. I want to plan for acquisition and disposal. Okay. All of these are kind of very specific functions and very specific user roles inside our software as they relate to fleet assets. Okay. So expanding that out a little bit, those same types of user groups and those same types of functions can also be applied to really any other type of asset. Okay, and that's what EAM stands for ultimately, is Enterprise Asset Management. So you may have seen that term either from some of our marketing emails, or if you attended one of our user academies in the past, you'd see folks with different colored badges on. That's EAM. That's essentially Enterprise Asset Management. All that really means is you can use the system to manage fleet assets in addition to other types of assets. Okay, and this graphic here kind of represents the groups that we would typically see, or kind of the departments that we typically see. It's not meant to be an exhaustive list by any means. I have groups and have worked with groups over the years that use the system to manage all types of unique equipment and unique assets, but generally, we work with a lot of city and county government. We have some state DOTs and things that we work with. So these tend to be kind of the typical like public works type of infrastructure or public services type of infrastructure that we see. So things in here like parks and forestry assets, solid waste and recycling facilities, streets and right-of-way assets, okay, water and wastewater. And then I included engineering and planning in here as well. Really, probably the last few years, kind of in my experience, we've had a lot of interest from some of the engineering and planning groups, potentially within your organizations, that were interested in using the software as well. And they kind of approach it from a little different angle. They're not so much interested in kind of maintaining different types of assets. They're really looking at large scale kind of capital planning or project management activities that might encompass a number of different assets or a number of different stakeholders and meetings and schedules. So we'll talk about some of the tools associated with that here as well. If you take away nothing else from the webinar today, I want you to know that FA, if I use that term, and EAM, it's really the same core software. Okay, so you guys in the webinar now, if you're using the system to manage your fleet assets, you already have the software to manage other types of assets. It's just kind of a licensing expansion that we do on our side. Okay, so if you take away nothing else, know that EAM stands for Enterprise Asset Management. It just really means that we can handle any type of asset that you want to track within your organization. Okay. And there's a lot of different tools in there. So moving to EAM kind of opens up a number of different tools, modules, capabilities. I'll touch on a few of those today. But ultimately, at its core, know that it's about asset management and work management. What are you tracking? What data do you need to track related to your assets, whether they're fixed infrastructure or fleet vehicles? And how do you track the work against those assets? So how are issues being reported? How are repairs being tracked? How are inspections being scheduled? Okay. And the best way I always like to illustrate that, I usually like to throw up this example for new groups that I've worked with in the past. I want to take a module that most of you guys are probably familiar with. This is the work management module in our system. Okay. It's really designed for kind of a supervisor role, a manager role. And the idea here is that they can quickly and easily get a snapshot of everything going on at their location. All right. So in this case, I'm at a fleet service center location. I'm able to quickly and easily see, look up assets, kind of see the status of those assets, all right? Look up different service requests, essentially drivers reporting different issues on those vehicles, filter those down, filter my work orders by category, okay? Take a look at my employees. The whole point here is that it's kind of a list-based view, which I can go and then drill into any information that I want, right? Designed to give me a high-level snapshot. Compare that with kind of, I'll say, a typical EAM view on that same portal, okay? And this time, I'm still able to look up assets. I'm still able to look up work orders, but really my primary function here revolves around a map of my area. I want to see a map of all the different assets I'm responsible for maintaining, or in this case, I want to look at work orders, but I want to categorize them a little differently. Okay, and so in this example, it's kind of a roads example or like a road and bridge group type of example. I want to look at work orders around my area that are specifically related to like guardrail replacement or sidewalks or work that I'm contracting out to vendors or contractors. Okay, so a lot of different ways to kind of filter this, but takeaway, just know, again, same portal, same tool, just some additional functionality, in this case geared around mapping and spatial analysis. So some considerations for you guys on the fleet side. Okay, I know we have kind of a mixed group on the webinar today, and so you may be in kind of one of two situations. I'll say either you currently use the system to manage fleet, and you're looking at expanding into other departments or other groups, or maybe you already have the EAM licensing in the EAM system, but you haven't yet worked in any other additional departments or additional groups in the system, and you're kind of considering the best way to do that. So a few considerations for you as we kind of head that direction. And this may be really obvious to you guys on the fleet side. And I know when I first joined AssetWorks, a lot of the projects I worked on, especially on the fleet side, we were very, very focused on that asset, that piece of equipment when it came into the shop, okay? Comes in for a repair, an issue's been reported, or it comes in for an inspection or a preventative maintenance service. Very, very focused on that vehicle. Once it left the shop, we were on to the next, the next asset, the next vehicle, the next piece of equipment. I didn't really think too much about what that vehicle or what that fleet asset was doing once it left the shop. And in reality, the assets that you guys maintain on the fleet side are being utilized to maintain other assets within your organization. And again, that may seem very obvious, but it was just kind of an interesting thing for me to wrap my head around too. For you guys on the fleet side, it gives you a couple advantages to start to have these other groups utilizing the system. The first and foremost is really that they are using your assets on their work orders. So I'll use an example of something like a street repair or a pipe replacement or kind of a larger type of construction project. Throughout that project, they are going to have, trucks and heavy equipment and all kinds of things out there in the field working on, in this case, their street segment, that street asset. But for you guys, what it starts to do as they kind of track their equipment usage and their vehicle usage on the work orders, it starts to give you a more complete picture really of how all of your fleet assets are being used. So now you get to see data related to those assets, not just when they come into the shop, But in between those visits, you also know that, hey, this particular vehicle was being used. It was out there as part of the, road resurfacing project that we did. Here was the operators, here was the time it was used and idling and driving and everything like that. So you start to get a whole kind of complete picture of not just the vehicle when it comes into the shop, but also how it's being used out in the field, and what type of activities it's being used for. Okay. I also put additional source of meter readings on the slide. I know from talking to different organizations, getting accurate meter readings can be a pain point, is probably the best way to say that. And so this opens up another potential avenue of collecting meter readings more often. So I know a lot of organizations I worked with, you tend to collect meter readings, obviously, when the vehicle comes in to the shop for different reasons. Or if you have some sort of telematics hardware, you can collect meter that way. Or sometimes we get that from fueling transactions. But this opens up, again, another additional source of those meter readings for you. Those different departments, the roads department, the water department, you can have those users collect usage and meter readings as part of the work that they're already performing. Okay. So non-fleet assets by comparison, the vehicles and equipment that you guys maintain are typically coming into the shop. Non-fleet assets, or what I'll call EAM assets, they're typically fixed in place around like a geographic area, let's say your city or county, okay, or your region. Because of that, there's some additional functionality and some additional workflows and some additional reporting that some of those groups have to do, whether related to their industry or just intricacies of kind of tracking that type of work. Okay, things like travel time come up a lot. Different types of like disaster response, FEMA disaster type reporting. Okay, EAM is flexible enough to set up different groups, different departments with different workflows and different coding structures to be able to track those. Okay. So just how you guys do things one way on the fleet side, you track your vehicles and equipment exactly how you want. Another group, another department can set up the system, have different settings, have different workflows and data that they are using to maintain their assets. Okay. I put the ability to submit service requests and issues to other departments. So this is something that, again, you start to get more of a complete picture across your organization of the different assets that you're maintaining. And it also opens up an avenue of communication to some of those other departments for you guys on the fleet side. So for those of you guys attending the webinar today, think about, just the building you're in watching this webinar, or the facility you're in watching this webinar. Let's say you have an issue in that building. Maybe it's too hot or too cold. You can use the same system that you're using to maintain your assets to submit a facilities request to the facilities group. Okay, or maybe you're driving to work and you see a downed tree or a sign that was hit in an accident or another issue in the roadway. You can report that to the road group. Again, all using the same system. One source of record essentially for all of your assets within your organization. Okay. So takeaways for today, just know that, again, it's one system. EAM is just an expansion of your current fleet system that you guys may be using today. Okay. We control access to that. One of the questions I always get is kind of how do you structure it so that, no one sees our fleet work orders or vice versa. I don't want to see anything related to any of the other groups. That's absolutely fine. We use permissions and user groups to separate those individual departments or individual groups as much as you want to. Okay. And most projects I've worked on, just to give you a perspective, most projects I've worked on, it kind of starts off where everyone wants to be completely siloed into their own area of the system. That's absolutely fine. We can do that. Usually as you get into it a little bit, some conversations start happening and there ends up being a little bit more crossover as you kind of get to talking with the other departments. That's fine too. Permissions in the system are very flexible. And we can set you up in any number of ways. Okay. Two other things here to consider real quick, just from talking to some other EAM customers over the years. Moving to EAM does open up an unlimited asset count. Okay, so that's something to consider. If you guys are considering expanding your fleet at any point in the near future, you may consider moving to an EAM license just because it does open up that unlimited assets, whether or not you add in any other department. Okay. And it's also an opportunity to share licensing costs. Again, this is kind of stemming from conversations I've had with groups I've worked with over the years. a lot of times when you guys are starting out, if you're the only ones using the system, you're kind of shouldering the whole cost of the software license and hosting if you're a hosted customer and things like that. But adding one other department in there gives you the potential to kind of split those costs up. Adding two different departments, four different departments and so on, kind of lets you divide up those costs a little bit if depending on how you guys build that information out internally. Right? So just something to consider there if you guys are considering moving to EAM. Yeah. So let's talk about some specific tools. I just wanted to highlight them real quick, and I'll move through this fairly quickly. First and foremost, I showed you a map in that other example. EAM, we're designed to integrate with your GIS environment or your GIS database. And GIS just stands for Geographic Information Systems. All that really is just a way for you to map and display your spatial assets around your area. Okay. And Esri is a partner of ours for many years. They are, I'll say, kind of the global leader in GIS technology. So we work with them. We're designed to integrate directly to your GIS database. So takeaway for today, just know that if you have a GIS system, it's most likely Esri. And if you have staff that kind of maintain your GIS data, we can hook into that data directly to pull it into our system or even push information back to GIS for different types of analysis. Again, let me know if you have questions on that at the end. Happy to dig into that for you. Okay. A few other tools I wanted to highlight here just briefly. The Asset Management Portal. It's a new portal that comes with the EAM licensing. I put in quotations here. It's designed for asset managers, and that may seem really straightforward. What I mean by that is typically the user group using this portal is concerned with like bringing new assets online or retiring old assets or staging a project for doing kind of a large scale replacement or something like that. Okay. But in addition to that, there's a lot of customization options in here that every group could take advantage of, even you guys on the fleet side. Okay. So in addition to kind of handling the GIS integration that we talked about, there's some map symbology options in here. So full disclosure, I am partially colorblind. So every map that I make, this one included, tends to have real bright colors associated with kind of the dots and the lines and the polygons and stuff that I create. Yours will probably look a lot nicer, but takeaway, just know that you can kind of change the color and texture of some of the symbology on those maps. The end goal is just to make it easy for your users to look and select what they need, right? But I also bolded here, you can customize data fields and descriptions using what are called asset profiles. And the idea behind this is that you can create profiles for different groups. The end result is that kind of the data that like a roads group wants to see or a water group wants to see is going to be very different from the data that you guys look at on the fleet side, potentially. Okay. So really what this allows you to do using a profile is any data you have collected on that asset, including any data stored in subsystems and attributes, can be pushed out to different areas of the system. You can actually build in some of that data into your description fields or into some of the asset headers or the work order headers. The end goal, again, is just to make it quick and easy for your users to see what's relevant to them. Okay. And as an example, I've worked with a lot of groups over the years who store information maybe related to like engine size or fluid capacities or tire sizes or things like that. Those are typically stored in attributes and take an extra click or two to dive into. You can push that information up into the description or up into the asset header if you like, so it's front and center when your technicians are doing a work order, right? So just something to take advantage of potentially for the EAM tools. We also offer some templates to add new assets quickly and easily. So things like MUTCD codes, kind of called MUT codes for signs. Essentially, every sign you see on the roadway has a code associated with it, an industry standard code. As an example, like all stop signs are R1-1. Okay. So if you want to add a new stop sign, you don't necessarily have to create that asset completely from scratch. You can just have your users kind of drop a pin, say it's a stop sign. All of that background coding will come over automatically. You can do the same thing with roads, vehicle types, really anything you might want to add quickly and easily. Okay. We also have what are called work projects. A work project is just a way to kind of package up multiple types of work activity. So maybe a larger scale project that might have several different work orders or might include several different departments in that project. So the example I'm showing here is something like a kind of a sewer line replacement or a water line replacement. You have a lot of different phases of that project that generally have dependencies. So we have to kind of dig in the street, dig into the street. We have to pull out the old piping. We have to replace the piping. We have to have the street crew or the roads crew come back and repave that street when we're done. Okay. So again, you don't want those activities to kind of go out of sequence, obviously. They're dependent on one another, but it's also just a way to get total cost or total tracking for the entire work project, as opposed to just specific work orders. Okay. So kind of a neat tool you can package up, again, work orders, service requests. I had one group that I work with that actually tracked even things like public meetings and meetings with contractors and stuff like that, and kind of built an entire project schedule for different work efforts they were doing. I did want to touch real quick on our mobile app. Some of you guys may be using some of our mobile solutions. We actually have a couple different products that we offer, but specifically for EAM, we use what's called AssetWorks Connect. It's designed to be a field mobility application, so you take it out in the field with you. Again, it has mapping capability kind of front and center. The software, the device knows exactly where you're at and knows where the nearby assets and work orders are that you have to do. Okay, so very handy for folks out in the field. A true use case. A lot of folks, if you're not a supervisor or manager role, you're kind of a field worker. Odds are 99% of the time you're just going to be using that mobile app with you. Okay, and it works in either a connected or disconnected environment. So if there's an area of your city or county or organization where you don't have cell phone reception or don't have Wi-Fi, that's absolutely okay. Those users can still perform that work, and it'll sync that data back once that connection is restored. Okay. All right, kind of moving into the capital planning module. This is, again, another tool that I think is extremely powerful and extremely beneficial for EAM, other departments, fixed type of assets that you might get into. So as we're talking about this, a quick caveat: the capital planning module and the asset performance assessment module, these are all really full topics and can be an entire webinar in and of themselves. So if you guys have any questions or want follow up on this after this initial webinar, please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to do a deeper dive into this with you as well. But what I wanted to show here is what's called the asset performance assessment. Again, it's an added module in the system that's part of EAM. And what this allows you to do is to categorize your assets into different groups. And the end goal of that is you can see my group of assets, kind of the average age or average condition of that group. And then you can drill into that group to look at specific assets. So what you're seeing here is actually like a sign group. And you can see some R1s, -1s, some stop signs in there as well. But this is essentially showing you when things are overdue for replacement, either based on age or condition. Okay, and the pop-out window I have here, what that's showing you is that typically we set up a stop sign as an example with a 15-year lifespan. So over time, this sign is gradually going to degrade, assuming it's not hit or damaged in other ways, and the system's going to start notifying me that we need a plan for replacement of this item, probably starting in early 2031. In this case, is kind of the age of that item degrades, right? And then we can take that specific sign or that specific HVAC unit or that section of road or whatever that particular need might be, and package that up into a capital project. You can store any data you want to related to the project. Okay, you can also break out individual project phases. So this example here is kind of a design build type of a project where I have a design and engineering stage, I have construction phases, I have project closeouts. You may even include things like RFI, RFP, solicitation periods in there as well. But the point is that you can break these out by planned and actual start and end dates. You can also track planned budget and adjusted budget, what you end up what that project ended up costing at the end. Right? So a lot of good information in here. And then real quick, I just want to touch on scoring and ranking. You can actually score and rank every project. And I've had some groups use this for different ways over the system, or over the years in the system. But the whole point here is that you can set up different scoring criteria, and you as a user can score that particular project. And you can also, if you have like a selection committee or different department heads, or however you guys review and fund your different projects or needs over the years, you can have them go in and score it as well. And the end goal here is just that you can put a quantifiable number on all of your projects and all of your needs that you might need. And so it gives you a little bit of a justification to say, well, we funded this project over this one because it scored a little bit higher according to our organizational goals. Okay. And all those projects eventually get rolled into a larger capital plan that you can use to kind of run different scenarios. What if we get this funding source this year? What if this larger project has to get pushed out a few years? What does that funding situation look like? Okay. And last but not least, I just wanted to leave you with a few specific examples. If you remember in that graphic that we started with, we tend to see a lot of different departments and different types of assets in the system, but I'll say fleet, facilities, and parks are probably the three that we tend to see most often. So we have some strategies specifically designed around those industries and those types of assets. So on the facility side, we have two things I wanted to highlight. We have what's called a starter database set. On the fleet side, you guys may be familiar with VMRS coding. It's essentially like a standardized industry code for components of a vehicle. Okay, as an example, like 013 is your brake code, and then you can go to a second and third level on that of different types of brakes and different types of activity you can do on brakes. Okay, same thing exists in the facilities world. We actually made a combined data set between the uniformat and master format code structure. So we kind of blended the two. Those are really both just facility construction standards that kind of break a building into different components. Excuse me. So you can see a quick example here. All D-type assets would be engineering. All D30 would be HVAC, D3021 or heat systems, etc. Okay, so it helps you even if you don't have a full asset inventory on day one. We can help you kind of load your assets into the system and categorize those assets based on industry standards. And we also have a facilities service request module. This is just a way for your users to put in an issue or report an issue on a building without them having to select a specific asset. All right. So you can break every one of your buildings and facilities down into these 5 different levels and have users report on any of those levels. Just allows for a little more general of a service request to come in. Right? On the fleet side, you're typically able to kind of report directly on the vehicle because you know the license number or the ID number. But in the facilities world, you may not want a user trying to pick out a specific asset. So that tool tends to be very helpful. And then last but not least, parks. The column on the left-hand side here, what you see, hopefully you kind of see a trend there. This was a list that I actually asked a group of our users at our annual AssetWorks Academy, our users conference that we do each year. We had a group of parks users and I asked them, what do you typically do? Or what's kind of your biggest pain point on things that you need to track? And you can probably see the trend there on the left-hand side, mowing, landscaping, mowing, graffiti removal. And then what type of things do they work on? And the whole idea here is that parks tends to do a lot of repetitive type of activity on a wide variety of assets. And so we have some tools in the system. I showed you work projects really quickly earlier, but we also have what are called multi-asset work orders, which allow you to set up kind of standing work orders and really select like a number of different parks or a number of different areas that might need like mowing or landscaping, and to track those kind of as a whole and spread out costs and labor and parts and materials and stuff as needed. So we have some tools to kind of address some common pain points with parks maintenance as well. So wrap up and takeaways for today. If you take away nothing else, just know that EAM is really an expansion of your current fleet software. Okay, it can be used to manage any type of asset across your organization, and there are many benefits and potential cost savings both for you guys on the fleet side and also for your organization as a whole with moving to EAM. Okay, and really, at its end goal, a consolidated asset management system is really used to make smarter asset replacement decisions. Track the maintenance on all the different assets and things that you guys are tracking, and to make better long-term investment decisions. Okay. So I threw a lot at you here in this 30 minutes. I wanted to give you a brief overview, but with that, let me turn it back to Brad and see if we had any questions come through in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. That was great. We did have one question come through, and I think we have about enough time for that. You
Sure.
mentioned in your inventory management slide, how does sorry, I apologize. You mentioned inventory management in one of the earlier slides. How does that work with EAM versus just fleet?
Sure, great question. You're right, and I had inventory management as kind of one of the existing fleet functions that you guys are probably familiar with. So just like adding assets for a different department or different group, we use permissions and user groups to separate those off. We can do the same thing with inventory locations. So fleet, you guys can still have your inventory location or locations that you use for your parts room. Some of the other groups can handle their inventory. They might have completely different parts and materials. They likely do, but they may have different workflow options too. Inventory is one of the areas in the system that I'll say there's kind of a spectrum in terms of how informal or formal you can do inventory. So I've worked with a lot of groups over the years who have kind of a formalized inventory management. They have dedicated staff. They have labels on all their bins, and they're periodically doing cycle counts and everything. And then I've worked with other groups where they might have a number of filters that they kind of store in a storeroom, but they're really not tracked. They're just kind of used as needed. I've worked with other organizations that just kind of buy parts and materials as you need them. So long story short, kind of going back to your original question, every group and every department that you add into EAM can have their own options and their own inventory location to manage. So great question.
I think that's all the time we have today. Any questions, we will reach out directly, but I just wanted to say thank you for attending today's presentation. I hope you all secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. Joe, I'd also like to thank you on behalf of AssetWorks for sharing your expertise with everyone today. Today's presentation will also be sent out as a recording and a PDF. And any questions, you see Joe's information there. His email is joseph.foster@assetworks.com. And if you want to reach him directly by his cell phone number, it is there as well, 727-313-2064. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.